"You are not my daughter. I never had a child like you." That was the last thing Kaitlyn's mother said to her before slamming the door on her face and on the last illusion she had of family. It wasn't just a heated argument. It was a declaration of exile. At 24, Kaitlyn had grown used to being invisible, but this moment felt like a final public disownment, the kind that echoes through your bones and never leaves. Raised between relatives who saw her as a shameful mistake, a child born from an affair, half-white, half-Latina Kaitlyn had no one. And the worst part, no answers. No one would tell her who her father was, only that he ran off like the coward he was. But one anonymous email was about to unravel everything. Before we dive deeper into Kaitlyn's unbelievable journey, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real-life revenge stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Kaitlyn grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, passed from household to household like a forgotten dead. Her skin was lighter than her cousins, her Spanish a little clumsier, and her mother's silence about her father became a defining wound. Her maternal grandparents wanted nothing to do with her. They blamed Kaitlyn for their daughter's ruined life. On the other side, her mother's siblings treated her like a family ghost present, but unwanted. She learned to keep her head down, to not ask questions, to stop believing in birthdays or ever hearing the word home. But behind her quiet eyes burned a persistent question: who am I, and why was I never enough? By the time Kaitlyn turned 25, she had saved enough money working 2 jobs to finally file for a DNA ancestry test. It wasn't about finding anyone. It was about proving that she had the right to exist, that her life meant something, even if her family had thrown her away. But what she found wasn't just answers. It was the beginning of a legacy soaked in betrayal power and a revenge no one saw coming. Let's step back into Kaitlyn's childhood, the quiet pain, the prejudice, and the lie that held everything together. Kaitlyn was 8 the first time she truly understood what shame felt like, not hers, but her family's. It was Christmas Eve, and the whole maternal clan had gathered at her abuela's house. The tree was up, tamales were steaming, and laughter spilled through every corner until Kaitlyn's name was called to sit for the family photo. Her aunt, with a forced smile, put an arm around Kaitlyn's shoulder and whispered through clenched teeth, "Don't smile too wide. You're not really one of us." The camera clicked. The moment was frozen forever, her in the corner shoulders, tense eyes, unsure. No one said it outright, but the truth screamed in every interaction. Kaitlyn was a walking reminder of a scandal her family wished never happened. Her mother, Elena, had gotten pregnant at 19, and when she came home with baby Kaitlyn and no husband, the family's wrath was swift and silent. There were no baby showers, no congratulations, just judgment and distance. The only thing Kaitlyn was ever told about her father was that he disappeared after ruining Elena's life. The identity of her father was never discussed, as if naming him might summon a ghost. What she did know was that he wasn't Mexican. Her skin was lighter, her nose narrower, her hair a softer brown, not the rich black that defined her family line. At school, she didn't fit either. Too white for the Hispanic kids, too brown for the white ones. When forms asked for her ethnicity, Kaitlyn would just leave it blank. Like everything else about her, it didn't seem to belong anywhere. By the time she turned 16, Kaitlyn had learned to survive by becoming invisible. She worked part-time at a diner after school and took community college classes early, using her small savings for textbooks instead of prom dresses. No one helped. No one noticed. Once she applied for a scholarship and needed her birth certificate. When she asked her mother for it, Elena scoffed. "Why no one's going to give money to a bastard with no last name that matters?" Kaitlyn didn't cry. Not anymore. But that night she stayed up reading state laws on parental rights and name changes. She didn't know why yet, but something in her started to burn. Not just pain, not just loneliness, but a cold, steady rage. That rage would become her fuel. There were small kindnesses. A teacher who saw her writing talent and encouraged her to publish a short story. a manager at the diner who let her take home leftover food, a neighbor who taught her how to change her own oil and use pepper spray. But family was a word Kaitlyn stopped using. Even at 21, when she landed a steady job as a clerk at a legal aid office, her family still treated her like she was an accident they couldn't erase. At a cousin's wedding, her name was left off the program. At her grandmother's funeral, no one saved her a seat. And worst of all was Elena. Sometimes Elena would get drunk and cry, blaming Kaitlyn for everything she lost: her dreams, her reputation, even her youth. "If I hadn't had you, I could have been something. You ruined everything." Kaitlyn never answered, but she kept a journal, filling it with quotes she clung to like lifelines. Sometimes the family you're born into is not your destiny. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. By 25, she had her own one-bedroom apartment, worked full-time, and took night classes. She didn't expect miracles, but she needed the truth. Not for them, for herself. That's when she took the DNA test. Not to find a father, not to belong, but to prove that she wasn't invisible, that she came from somewhere, that even if no one claimed her, her bloodline existed, and so did her story. 2 weeks later, she got a message request in her email. "Hi, I think I'm your uncle. I've been looking for you." What Kaitlyn uncovers from one email, and the DNA result that will shake her entire identity to the core. The email was brief, polite, cautious. "Hi, Kaitlyn. I believe I may be your uncle. My name is Thomas Whitaker. My brother Andrew passed away 6 years ago. Based on your DNA results, I think he may have been your father. Please reach out if you'd like to talk." Kaitlyn stared at the screen. The name Whitaker meant nothing to her, but something about the message felt steady. Not like a scam, not dramatic, just real. Her heart pounded as she logged back into the Ancestry website. Her top match, Thomas Whitaker. 50% match, likely uncle. There it was. No rumors, no silence, just data and truth. They spoke later that night. Thomas was warm, kind, and heartbroken. He'd had no idea his younger brother Andrew had a child. Andrew had been a free spirit, an artist who drifted between cities and causes. He met Elena briefly at a summer art festival in Santa Fe, when they were both barely out of college. Thomas admitted, "My brother wasn't perfect, but he wouldn't have abandoned you if he knew." And then he dropped the bombshell. Andrew hadn't just died, he had died wealthy. Turns out, Andrew had invested early in some tech startup, dumb luck, Thomas called it. When he passed away in a hiking accident, he had no wife, no legal children, and no will. The estate defaulted to his next of kin, Thomas. But if Kaitlyn was proven to be his biological daughter, she wasn't just entitled to a portion of that estate, she could claim it all. At first, Kaitlyn didn't believe it. It sounded like a setup. She laughed nervously, asked for proof. Thomas, unfazed, sent over scanned documents, the deed to a large piece of undeveloped land in northern Arizona, brokerage accounts, Andrew's journals, and then the photo. A black and white snapshot of Andrew in his 20s shirt stained with paint, smiling under the desert sun. He had Kaitlyn's jawline, her uneven eyebrows, her exact half-smirk. Kaitlyn didn't cry, but her fingers trembled as she saved the image. For the first time, she was looking at the man half of her came from. And he looked like someone who might have stayed if given the chance. The legal process took months. DNA confirmation was the first step. It was clear-cut, 99.9% paternity. Kaitlyn was Andrew's daughter. Thomas, to his credit, didn't contest it. In fact, he helped expedite things. He said Andrew would have wanted it that way. He even offered to transfer a portion of the estate to her immediately. But Kaitlyn didn't want the money. Not yet. What she wanted was the land. When she saw it in person for the first time, she understood why her father had held onto it for so long. Nestled between desert cliffs and red canyons, the property stretched for miles, empty, raw, undisturbed. It didn't look like home, but it felt like freedom. Meanwhile, word started spreading. One of Kaitlyn's cousins, obsessed with genealogy apps, stumbled upon her updated family tree. Then came the texts. The cousin who never spoke to her suddenly wanted to catch up. An aunt asked her to meet for coffee. Elena said nothing until she showed up at Kaitlyn's apartment uninvited. "Don't you think you've punished me enough?" her mother said, arms crossed, voice brittle. "Running off to be with them? Posting pictures like you've always belonged there." Kaitlyn replied, calm and cold. "I never belonged here. You made sure of that." Elena scoffed. "That man abandoned us. He left me pregnant and alone." "No," Kaitlyn said, holding up a journal she'd received from Thomas. "You never told him I existed. You made that choice. Not him." The journal was clear. Andrew had written about a girl he loved, Elena, and a summer that changed him. When she stopped responding to his letters, he thought she'd moved on. He searched, asked mutual friends, even returned to Albuquerque briefly. But no one told him the truth. It wasn't abandonment. It was erasure. As the estate finalized, Kaitlyn faced a decision: sell the land and pocket the seven-figure sum, or do something with it. The idea came slowly then, all at once. She'd spent a life being erased. Maybe this land could be for people like her, the ones no one wanted. Artists, runaways, misfits. She contacted local architects and proposed a Center Park cultural retreat, part youth shelter, part gallery. She called it the in-between, a space for those caught between identities, between families, between worlds. And then came the ultimate twist. During the dedication ceremony of the first building, a man approached her in the parking lot. Polished suit, fake smile. Kaitlyn recognized him instantly, Uncle Marcos, her mother's older brother, the one who once told her she was lucky anyone kept her. Now he extended a hand like they were old friends. "We heard you're doing well. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you had fire." Kaitlyn didn't shake his hand. "She also said I should be grateful to sleep on the floor." He chuckled awkwardly. "Let's not dwell on the past. Family's family." "No," Kaitlyn said, her voice steel. "You made it clear I'm not one of you." She walked past him, shoulders straight, heels echoing off the concrete. But the past isn't done with Kaitlyn yet. When her success puts her face in the spotlight, the family she left behind decides to make their own move, and this time they come for more than forgiveness. Success has a way of drawing people out from admiration, envy, and sometimes both. For Kaitlyn, it drew out vultures wearing the faces of family. Within a year, the in-between was gaining attention. Local news covered its mission to support youth who had aged out of foster care, young artists of color, and those displaced by rejection. Kaitlyn's face was on the cover of a regional magazine titled "The Daughter Who Built Her Own Family." That was when they came. Not subtly, not one by one. They came in a pack. Elena arrived first unannounced, waiting outside Kaitlyn's center one afternoon, with sunglasses and a trembling bottom lip. She had aged quickly, lines carved deeper by years of resentment. But her voice was the same controlling, sugar-laced, insincere. "I saw the news," she said. "You've done well for yourself." Kaitlyn kept her arms crossed, blocking the doorway. "What do you want?" Elena sighed. "Can we not be like this? I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother." "No," Kaitlyn replied, ice in her voice. "You were a woman who had me. That's not the same." 2 days later, it was Aunt Carla and Uncle Marcos armed with polite smiles and legal documents. They had filed a claim against Andrew's estate, arguing that Kaitlyn's father had known he had a child and had intentionally excluded her family from the inheritance. According to them, Elena's silence didn't matter. They were her true guardians and had a moral right to a portion of what Kaitlyn now owned. It was absurd, but it was also real. Because under Arizona law, even a dismissed claim still had to be answered. Kaitlyn would need to hire more legal help, take depositions, and revisit every paper trail that proved she had never been wanted. For a week, she didn't sleep. She lay awake rereading Andrew's journals as if looking for a line that would end this nightmare. One entry stuck with her: "Art isn't what we leave behind. It's what we choose to build while we're still hurting." That line hurt, because Kaitlyn was still hurting, and they knew it. Her family had always known exactly where her softest places were, and now they were stabbing at them again. Not because they wanted reconciliation. They wanted credit. They wanted a piece of what they discarded. She sat in her office one night, and stared at a childhood photo of herself, 9 years old, hugging a stuffed raccoon, fake smiling at a birthday party she wasn't invited to. They'd left her out of the photos, but someone had snapped this one by accident. That night she broke, not in tears, in fury. She called a press conference. Standing under the blazing Arizona sun, Kaitlyn addressed the media directly. "My name is Kaitlyn Whitaker. Yes, I changed my name, not because I hated where I came from, but because I was never allowed to belong there in the first place." She looked dead into the camera. "I was raised by people who told me I was a burden, who made sure I never forgot I wasn't welcome. And now that I've built something on my own, they want to share. But let me be clear, they don't get to walk back in just because there's something to take now." The video went viral. She didn't care about fame, but she did care about voice. And for the first time, she had one loud enough to shake mountains. But backlash followed. Elena appeared on a rival podcast, crying into a tissue. "I was a single mother. I was scared. I never meant to hurt Kaitlyn." The host nodded sympathetically. "But do you still love her?" "Of course," Elena whispered. "She's my daughter, even if she doesn't want me." Online people took sides. Some said Kaitlyn was cruel, others called her brave. But Kaitlyn stayed silent. Because this wasn't about PR. It was about drawing a line. Then came the last betrayal. A former board member of the In-Between, someone Kaitlyn had trusted, leaked financial records misrepresented, cherry-picked, to make it seem like Kaitlyn was misusing funds. It was a lie quickly disproven, but the damage rippled through her sponsors and donors. For 48 hours, she was at risk of losing everything. She stared out at the property, once a place of peace, now tainted with battle scars. In her mind, she heard every insult again. "You're not one of us. No one will ever want you. You're just like your father." That last one stuck, because now she knew what it meant. Andrew wasn't a ghost. He was a fighter, a builder, a man erased by someone else's fear. Kaitlyn wasn't just his daughter by blood. She was his legacy, and they couldn't touch that. The final blow didn't come from lawyers or journalists. It came from Elena. She showed up again this time, not with tears, but with venom. "I hope it was worth it," she spat, standing outside Kaitlyn's building while reporters watched. "You're all over the news, but you'll always be that unwanted little mistake to me." Kaitlyn's hands trembled. She stepped forward, stared her mother down. "You're right," she said calmly. "I was a mistake, but I became something you never expected, a woman who doesn't need your love to survive." And in that moment, something shattered. The grip her mother had on her, the one forged in shame and silence, broke. Kaitlyn walked back inside, past the cameras, past the whispers, and straight to the youth wing of her center. There she sat beside a teenage girl crying on a bench, rejected by her parents for being gay. Kaitlyn placed a hand on her shoulder and simply said, "You belong here." And now, with her final decision to sever the past for good, Kaitlyn steps into the most important choice of her life, the moment that will define her, not as a survivor, but as the woman who rewrote the rules. For the first time in months, Kaitlyn turned off her phone. No emails, no texts, no alerts from her lawyer, her board, or her PR team, just silence. She drove out to the farthest ridge of the Arizona land, where the red cliffs met sky and wind. The place where her father Andrew had once set up an easel and painted what he saw. She knew this from his journals. One entry stayed with her. "This ridge feels like the edge of the world, but it's where I feel most whole, like I finally stepped outside their lies." That line hit differently now, because Kaitlyn had finally done the same. She sat on the dry stone for what felt like hours, staring at the vastness before her. It was quiet, not empty, just peaceful. For the first time, she let herself feel everything, the rage, the grief, the betrayal. And underneath it all, the aching question, now what? She had fought so hard to prove she belonged to someone somewhere. But what she'd learned was harsher and more liberating than anything she expected. Sometimes you don't get the apology. Sometimes they never admit they were wrong. Sometimes you have to move forward without justice. But you move forward anyway. Later that evening, Kaitlyn met with Thomas, her uncle, and perhaps the only living relative who had never lied to her. They sat on the porch of his small ranch house sipping iced tea. The sun was dipping below the mountains. "I never had kids," Thomas said. "Was too scared I'd mess it up. But if I had a daughter, I'd want her to be exactly like you." Kaitlyn smiled quietly. "You don't think I've gone too far, not far enough," he said. "You've spent your whole life asking for a place at their table. It's time you built your own." She thought about that, really let it settle. He was right. She'd built something powerful, something that changed lives not because she wanted revenge, but because she knew what it was like to be no one's priority. But it wasn't finished. That night she stood before the unfinished second building of the In-Between. The plan was to name it after her father, the Andrew Whitaker Center for the Unheard. But standing there, she knew something had shifted. This wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about identity. And Kaitlyn didn't want her name, her mission, or her home to be defined by the man who gave her life, or the woman who nearly destroyed it. She walked through the empty hallways lit by the construction crew's floodlights and made her decision. The next morning, she filed paperwork to legally sever all financial and legal ties with Elena and the rest of her maternal family. To finalize her name change not just on social media or in casual use, but on every record, Kaitlyn Whitaker, fully, permanently. And to rename the new center the House of Chosen Names, a space for anyone rebuilding who they are, a home for those reclaiming the identity they were told they never had the right to choose. At the grand reopening event 2 months later, Kaitlyn stood on stage. The crowd included politicians, press artists, and dozens of teens from across the state. Some had scars. Some had stories like hers. All of them had found something here, a reason to believe they weren't broken. Kaitlyn took a breath. "My name is Kaitlyn Whitaker. I wasn't raised to believe I mattered. But I decided to matter anyway. This center isn't about me. It's about every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Here you get to rewrite your story. You get to choose who you are." Thunderous applause. Tears, nods from strangers who had become family. And for Kaitlyn, something deeper than victory. Peace. Back in her office that evening, she looked at a framed quote from one of Andrew's letters. "Build what you wish you'd been given." Underneath it, Kaitlyn added a sticky note in her own handwriting and never ever let them take it from you. But not everyone accepts being shut out, especially not a family used to control. When they return with one final act of desperation, Kaitlyn's boundaries will be tested one last time. They didn't take the hint. 3 weeks after the grand reopening of the House of Chosen Names, Elena and 2 of Kaitlyn's uncles showed up uninvited this time with a film crew. They claimed it was for a documentary about healing family rifts, but Kaitlyn knew better. It was a publicity stunt, one last desperate move to rewrite the story with themselves in the spotlight. They smiled at the cameras, called her our daughter, our blood, our miracle. But Kaitlyn was ready. She calmly walked out the front doors, escorted by 2 of her staff. Microphones were pushed toward her, and Elena reached out to touch her shoulder, just like old times pretending to be tender. Kaitlyn took the mic herself, voice clear, steady. "This is private property. These individuals are not welcome here and are attempting to exploit a story they were never part of. If they do not leave immediately, they will be escorted out and served restraining orders. Effective today." A pause. Then she added, "Abandoning a child and returning only for the camera is not a reunion. It's a performance." Gasps. Cameras flashed. One of the reporters turned his mic toward Elena, but she had nothing to say. Her expression cracked. For once, she looked small. Security walked them off the property. No yelling, no drama. Just a quiet, humiliating exit. Kaitlyn didn't smile. She didn't need to. The audience did it for her. Online, the clip went viral again, this time with a different energy. Queen energy, they called it. Boundary goddess. The art of the calm takedown. But to Kaitlyn, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure, final and firm. And now with the past behind her and peace finally within reach, Kaitlyn reflects on what it truly means to belong and leaves us with one unforgettable truth. On a quiet morning, Kaitlyn stood at the edge of the land that once felt foreign and claimed it once more, this time not with paperwork or DNA, but with certainty. The past no longer haunted her. It had shaped her, yes, but it no longer defined her. She wasn't the unwanted daughter. She wasn't a mistake. She was the woman who turned rejection into purpose, silence, into strength and pain, into something beautiful. Kaitlyn learned the hardest, most liberating truth of all. Sometimes the family you build matters more than the one you're born into. And that love, real love, never asks you to shrink, beg, or break to deserve it. She didn't forgive for their sake. She healed for hers. So when someone asked her later, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she simply smiled and replied, "No, because if they were, I wouldn't be here." If Kaitlyn's story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more true stories of resilience and justice. And if you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace, you're not alone. Tell us your story below.